This is a story of the Sellen family. We can trace our roots to northwestern Germany in Krefeld to the late 1600s. Henry Sellen is our first known ancestor. Although our name was originally Sellen, by 1750 the EN was dropped and we became the Cell family. This is my cousin Dick Cell from Kent, Washington. He and I have researched the Cell family together for a dozen years and many more years separately.
Probably at least 30 years for me.
When Henry sailed from Rotterdam about 1685, his voyage would probably have taken 6 to 8 weeks, about the same time that it took for Columbus to cross the ocean 200 years earlier. Henry landed in Germantown, a small German village outside of Philadelphia, founded by Krefelders just 2 years before Henry arrived. The yellow marks on this 1694 map of Germantown shows some of the land that Henry owned at one time or another. Henry married here and had a family of 6 children. He probably farmed in the early days. His first wife probably died around 1710, and then he remarried a woman by the name of Margaret and had several more children, including our ancestor, Abraham Cell. In the later years, Henry operated a flax oil mill. Flax seeds produced linseed oil for use in paint, varnish, and other products. Henry was very active in this Mennonite church and in other civic affairs. His signature has been found on dozens of documents in Germantown. Then, after living in Germantown for 50 years, he purchased 200 acres of land in Diggs Choice in what is now Union Township, Adams County, Pennsylvania. Why would a man in his 70s take his family off to the rigors of the frontier? Maybe to secure cheap land for his children. The trip from Germantown to Union Township was probably not an easy one. Their wagons would have followed this red line along the Great Wagon Road to the Susquehanna River. Here they would have had to ferry all their possessions across the wide river on John Wright's ferry. It's not certain that the road from Wrightsville to Frederick, Maryland was passable to wagons in 1735. If not, they would have had to carry all their goods on horseback or muleback for the rest of the trip. They finally reached Hanover. However, there was no town here in 1735. That would come 10 years later. However, here at 300 Frederick Street in 1735, there was a house owned by John Adam Forney. People were expected to show hospitality to strangers, as there were very few inns on the frontier at this early date. Do you think it was here that 20-year-old Abraham Cell first laid eyes on Louisa Charlotte Forney, the 16-year-old daughter of the owner of the house? According to the old Forney Bible, Abraham and Louisa Charlotte were married about 7 years later. After 3 more miles of travel from the Forney house, the Cell caravan arrived at this spot. 125 years later, this road would bear the Cell name. Only another 1.5 miles to go cross country. Nearly all of this area was wooded then. The Cell Station Road goes through the heart of Seldom. We are now driving down the Cell Station Road toward the 200-acre farm that Henry Sellen purchased from John Lemon in 1735. Lemon had lived here for several years and had improved the farm with a house and maybe a shed for animals. Here we are at the entrance to Henry's Lane at what is now 1086 Cell Station Road. I wonder if John Lemon came out to greet them as they arrived. Coming out here on the frontier after living for 50 years in Germantown must have been a tremendous change. Our ancestor Abraham Cell had just turned 20, and his brothers and sisters were teenagers. This former Cell property has been owned by the Hanover Shoe Farms for over 60 years. All of the shoe farm buildings are painted yellow with green trim. To the right of this barn is a pile of rubble where Henry Sellon's house could have stood. This old house is not the original, but it was torn down several years ago. There's no record concerning the original buildings. People often built new houses where the old houses stood because of wells or springs and shade trees. Last year, Dick Sell rented an airplane and he and I flew over our first ancestors' farm. So here's where it all got started in Union Township, clearing the fields acre by acre, planting, harvesting, sowing, cooking, building their new life. Henry Sellon died in 1749. He's probably buried somewhere here on his land in an unmarked grave. 10 years ago, I started a tour of some of the historic Sell sites seen in this video. The tour leaves at 10 a.m. from the picnic woods on the morning of the reunion. The tour ends in the Christ Church Cemetery, where the participants can visit the graves of their ancestors. Here is one scene from the 1995 tour of Seldom, The Kingdom of the Cells. One of the highlights of the tour of Seldom is a visit to the over 300-year-old white oak tree in the meadow of Henry Sellon's farm. This tree must have been a small sapling when Henry arrived in Germantown in 1685. It's now over 115 feet tall. This oak must have been a sturdy tree when Henry arrived on this spot 50 years later. The trunk is now over 19 feet in diameter. Its branches spread over 135 feet. This tree is famous in Pennsylvania. This oak tree was featured in the 1987 book Big Trees of Pennsylvania, published by the Pennsylvania Forestry Association. Why did this one tree survive?
In the woods right over here, and it's Little Conewago Creek. And it did flow right up at the base of the tree, and it started eating away at the roots and everything. So some of the property owners back in the early 1900s poured a whole bunch of concrete around the base of the tree to try to protect it, because even in those days they knew 100 feet further over that way. And Kenneth just happened to find the other day the pieces of concrete are laying over there in the woods. And that's a white oak tree.
When the Hanover Shoe Farms purchased this land over 60 years ago, one of the owners was a tree fancier and saw that the tree got special care. Tree surgeons repaired the broken limbs. Steel cables were put up to support the limbs. The tree was well fertilized and cared for by Clyde Sterner.
Anybody be interested in holding hands around this tree? We're going to get you on videotape. To me, it's a perfect image of this old tree.
He did about 5 different things, and I just went there and they said, go back to the tree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
In 1994, the tree had acorns for the first time in 3 years. This tree has become the logo for our Sell Reunion t-shirts. Who knows how much longer this magnificent tree will be with us. We will now go back the Sell Station Road to Henry's son Abraham's farm along the Littlestown Hanover Highway across from the Pine Grove Road. Abraham was Henry's oldest son by his second wife. Abraham Cell was 26 years old when he obtained a warrant from the Penns for 100 acres of this land in April 1741. He was married the following year. In November 1747, he warranted another adjoining 100 acres of land. He called this 200-acre tract Abraham's Plains. Anna May Sell Mickley holds the original deed of Abraham's Plains, granted by Thomas and John Penn to Abraham Cell. She found this deed among her father's effects. 93 acres of this land was owned by 6 generations of her Cell ancestors from 1741 until 1946. These 6 generations were the owners of this land. The original buildings were probably right in the middle of this picture, near the first bare spot, not far from the present house. The glass tax of 1798 indicates that there was a 20-foot by 40-foot log house here and a 30-foot by 57-foot log barn here in the meadow. There was also a large spring house and 2 stables. After Adam Cell died in 1820 without a will, the 200-acre tract was divided. This map from the Adams County Historical Society shows the partition of the land and the location of the buildings at that time. The log barn and house at the bottom of the screen was probably the site of the original buildings. This is the present house, built by Abraham Cell's great-grandson, Peter Cell, in 1862. Peter had purchased large quantities of lath and lumber in 1862. Cells farmed this land until 1907, and then the farm was operated mostly by tenant farmers. Anna May Sell Mickley painted this picture of the Cell house that appeared before 1946. This is how the house looked before it was painted the Hanover Shoe Farms yellow and green. This house holds many fond memories for her. The barn was built by Peter Cell, again probably in 1862. This farm was purchased by the Hanover Shoe Farms in 1946. They designate their farms by the name of the seller, in this case, Clayton and Harry Cell. Here is Abraham Cell's little slate tombstone in the Christ Church Cemetery. The stone is inscribed in German. It's amazing that it has survived for nearly 210 years. The Cell reunion has had the stone reset in cement to preserve it. We don't know where Abraham's 2 wives are buried. Abraham served as a captain in the York County militia during the American Revolution. During the French and Indian War, he drove supply wagons on General Braddock's campaign to Pittsburgh. Anna May, a 3-time Cell reunion president, compiled her genealogy of the Cell family in 1958. We will leave Abraham's farm and visit the farm where Abraham's son, Jacob Cell Sr., lived, just across the highway. Jacob Cell Sr. was the oldest son of Abraham Cell. Just behind Breekner's Tire and Auto Shop is the location of Jacob Cell Sr.'s farm. In 1762 and in 1765, Abraham Cell warranted an additional 215 acres from the Penns. This land is located between the Pine Grove Road and Bart's Church Road. Jacob Cell Sr. lived here from the early 1770s until his death in 1825. Jacob Sr. inherited most of this land from his father. In 1798, there was a 2-story log house, 21 feet by 40 feet, and a 60-foot log and stone barn here. These are not the original buildings. Here Jacob and his wife, Christina Hessen Cell, raised their 9 children. Only 2 children remained in Union Township. Son Abraham moved to Blair County, Pennsylvania. 4 sons migrated to Stark County, Ohio. 1 son lived near Tonytown, Maryland. Daughter Maria Kefauver moved to Gettysburg, and only a daughter, Margaret Unger, and son Jacob Cell Jr. lived nearby. This little stream flows down in the meadow below the house. Upstream, this creek was dammed up and powered a small sawmill, so Jacob Sr. was known as Jacob the Sawmiller to distinguish him from several other Jacob Cells in the area. Jacob's tombstone, written in German, is still standing in the Christchurch Cemetery 170 years after his death. Christina is buried beside him. Jacob Sr. also served in the York County Militia during the American Revolution. In 1976, the Daughters of the American Revolution placed this monument in the Christchurch Cemetery, which cited our ancestors' service. Jacob Cell Jr. was the middle son of Jacob Cell Sr. Jacob Cell Jr.'s farm is now in a housing development called Tanglewood Heights. The old farm buildings still stand in the middle of this development on the Pine Grove Road. Jacob Jr. purchased this farm in 1810. All but the oldest of their 9 children were born here. This old farmhouse was probably not the original house. While Jacob Jr. farmed here, his main occupation was a millwright, the designer and builder of mills. He signed his name, Jacob Cell Millwright, to distinguish him from the other Jacob Cells in Union and German Township. Jacob's great-great-grandson, John N. Cell's tombstone, overlooks Jacob Cell Jr.'s second farm. Jacob Jr. bought this second large farm that adjoined the Christchurch Cemetery in 1832. This 185-acre farm has 2 sets of buildings. This was the location of Jacob's home. This farm is now called the Cress Spring Farm. The house is very old and is likely the one used by Jacob's family. The 3 older children were probably married by the time the Cell family moved here, but Jacob III, Matilda, Abraham of Cell Station, Henry of Plum Creek, and Daniel of Littlestown probably lived here as teenagers. While Jacob Jr. was a millwright by trade, there was also a sawmill on this property. This is the approximate site of the mill race behind the house. Here's the kitchen and fireplace where Catherine Leicester Cell must have cooked for her family of teenagers. Whose bedroom was this? Maybe Jacob III, Abraham, Henry, or maybe Daniel slept here. Was this the master bedroom? It had a fireplace. All but one of Jacob and Catherine's children lived between Littlestown and Hanover. Most of the people who attend the Cell reunion are descendants of Jacob Cell Jr. Jacob Cell Jr. is buried at Christchurch, but his tombstone is written in English. He died 140 years ago. The old Christchurch, which all of the early Cells attended, looked like this. I was baptized and confirmed here. This monument, donated by Miriam Cell Studi, marks the location of the old church, which was torn down in 1963. The old cemetery contains the remains of 7 generations of Cells, all with tombstones. Elizabeth Cell Gobrecht was the oldest child of Jacob Cell Jr. When Jacob Cell Jr. moved away from his first farm, his daughter Elizabeth, married to John C. Gobrecht, operated this large farm. On page 285 of the Littlestown Bicentennial book, John and Elizabeth's son and grandson are shown at the side of this house in 1889. After farming here for many years, John C. Gobrecht bought this farm from his father-in-law, Jacob Cell Jr., in 1854. Later, Gobrecht's son purchased the farm from his father, so 3 generations of Cells and Gobrechts owned this farm. David Cell was the oldest son of Jacob Cell Jr. Near this sign at the beginning of the Bart's Church Road, David Cell farmed and operated a mill from 1840 to 1861. Herb Cell points to the woods where his great-great-grandfather's farm and mill were located. Only remnants of a foundation and a mill race remain. Upstream, this creek was dammed up to run the mill. Here the stream crosses the Chestnut Hill Road. The Hanover Evening Sun recently published this old photograph of David Cell's house and mill. 8 of David's 12 children were born in this house. This is the Bullinger family who purchased the mill from David's widow in 1861. This was a grist mill for grinding wheat and corn. I wonder if David's father designed this mill. One of David's sons was killed in the Civil War. Edmund Sell was killed near Winchester, Virginia on November 16, 1864. 2 weeks later, Edmund's mother traveled from Littlestown to Winchester, where she had his body dug up, and returned to Christ Church, where a funeral service was held, and he was reburied here. After David's death, his wife Lydia sold the mill and bought a house at 207 East King Street, Littlestown. This was probably not the original house. Herb Sell and his son John show the old cradle that's been in their family for 5 generations. It was brought from Germany by Mrs. Noah Sell's parents. Jacob Sell III was the second son of Jacob Sell Jr. Just off the Bart's Church Road is the 66-acre farm of Jacob Sell III. Dick Sell shows his great-great-grandfather's Jacob Sell III's house that was undergoing extensive renovations in the summer of 1995. Jacob lived his whole adult life here. This is how the house appeared in the spring of 1995 before the renovations began. This 125-year-old house was in extreme disrepair. This old cornerstone has been relocated to the front of the house. Note the word build instead of built. The cornerstone was formerly on the other side of the house. The inside of the house will be completely renovated. A 2-story addition is also planned. Jacob's 9 children were not born in this house, but they certainly visited here and sat around this old fireplace. The old hand-dug well is still in use today. All of the original outbuildings have been torn down. Jacob had a long-standing drinking problem. Jacob was walking home from Littlestown after a bout of drinking on the night of December 7th, 1882, which was very, very cold. He stumbled into this ditch very near his home. He spent the night here, and his frozen body was found by his family the next morning. He was 67. An inquest was held, and it was determined that intoxication caused his death. Fred Kaufman proudly displays his great-great-grandfather Jacob Sell's 180-year-old hand-drawn baptismal certificate. Johann Bart, a neighbor, was the calligrapher. Bart drew a similar baptismal certificate for Jacob's son 27 years later. German was probably still the main language when Jacob III was born. Matilda Sell Zook was the 3rd daughter of Jacob Sell Jr. Matilda and Joseph Zook lived in a very modest house here at 46 East King Street, Littlestown. They raised their 7 children here. This is not the original house. Matilda and Joseph are buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery. 4 of their children migrated to Iowa. 2 of their sons served in the Civil War. Abraham Sell of Sell Station was the 3rd son of Jacob Sell Jr. We are back at Sell Station. This is the house of Abraham Sell, the great-grandson of the first Abraham. His 23-acre farm was part of Abraham's plains. Abraham opened a store just down the road, which was the center for social activities in the area for 3/4 of a century. The original building burned down years ago, and this building took its place. This is Bob Menchie, a great-grandson of Abraham Sell and a grandson of Ozias Sell. Bob owns a music store in Hanover. In 1858, Abraham's store became a stop for the new railroad from York to Frederick. Freight and passengers passed by Sell Station for 90 years, but even the tracks are gone now. In 1866, a post office was opened in the store, and Abraham was the 2nd postmaster. His son Ozias was postmaster from 1882 to 1903 and never missed a mail delivery. Most of Abraham's children moved to Hanover. Henry Sell was the 4th surviving son of Jacob Sell Jr. We are now at the southwest edge of Hanover at Plum Creek. Henry Cell purchased this farm on the edge of Hanover in 1855 and lived here for 53 years. Here is W.E. Bill Cell at his great-grandfather Henry Cell's house. Bill is the owner of a sporting goods store in Hanover. On the evening of July 1st, 1863, the entire U.S. Fifth Army Corps moved from Union Mills, Maryland to Hanover. 10,000 troops were bivouacked for the night on Henry Cell's farm and the surrounding farms. They slaughtered 19 head of cattle and were preparing their evening meal. General Sykes, the Corps commander, and his 3 division commanders were seated around a dinner table in Henry Cell's house. A messenger came from General Meade in Gettysburg, ordering the entire Corps to Gettysburg immediately. The troops dropped their cooking, marched all night, and took part in the next 2 days' Battle of Gettysburg. Boy, did Henry have leftovers. Henry had a milk route in Hanover. He sold his farm in 1908 to the Hanover Shoe Farms and retired to Pennville. Unfortunately, Henry's house was torn down 6 weeks after we filmed it in August 1995. We are now back in Littlestown. Daniel Cell was the youngest child of Jacob Cell, Jr. Daniel Cell farmed on the edge of Littlestown. His farm is located behind the present American Legion home. My great-great-grandfather Daniel Cell purchased this farm in 1856. His old house has recently been restored. The barn burned down about 20 years ago. Daniel was the guardian for his sister Matilda's child and grandchildren after she died. Daniel Cell also had a milk route in Littlestown for many years. This spring house was probably used to cool the milk. Daniel was an active member at Christ Church. He was a member of the building committee for the church's renovation in 1877. This charcoal sketch was owned by his granddaughter Florence Cell. When Daniel retired from farming in 1890, he moved to 322 East King Street. This ends our overview of the first 5 generations of Cells. Stanley Cell, my father, was one of the co-founders of the Cell Reunion in 1946. He served as president of the reunion for 3 terms. His wife, my mother, Mabel, now lives at Homewood at Plum Creek. She has lived there since 1987. Stanley and Mabel lived along the Littlestown-Hanover Highway for over 45 years. He built 3 houses on his grandfather Raymond Cell's land. Stanley is the 7th generation of Cells buried at Christ Church, all with tombstones standing. When John Cell got out of the service in 1945, he and Stanley began talking in earnest about starting a Cell reunion. John and all 4 of his children have been presidents of the Cell reunion. Ada Cell, John's wife, continues to live at 26 East King Street, Littlestown, where they have lived since 1943. Ada has attended 49 of the 50 Cell reunions, a record. John is also buried at Christ Church. He is also the 7th generation in his line to be buried there. 2 famous Cell gunsmiths lived in Littlestown. We think that Peter Cell was the son of Henry Cell by his first wife. Jacob Cell the gunsmith moved to 48 West King Street, Littlestown, about 1789. His gunsmith shop was behind this house. Here he made guns that are highly prized today, some selling for over $10,000. His guns are illustrated in many books on Pennsylvania and Kentucky rifles. Albert Starner, a neighbor, owns a fowling piece that is believed to be one of Jacob's guns, although it's not signed by Jacob. Notice the intricate workmanship. The David Millers have tastefully restored and furnished this 18th century log house. They've received an award from the county for their years of painstaking labor that they put into the restoration. The kitchen is an interesting blend of antique and modern. In 1815, Jacob Cell and his family left Littlestown after 26 years of labor and migrated to Ohio, where he died in 1848. When Jacob Cell left Littlestown, his youngest brother, Frederick, opened a gunsmith shop across the street from his house. Frederick's house stood where this parking lot is located beside St. Paul's Lutheran Church. Frederick's craftsmanship was even better than his brother Jacob's. Frederick and his wife are buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery, Littlestown. Some of the Cell descendants were touched by the Battle of Gettysburg. 3 of Abraham Cell's great-grandchildren were directly affected by the battle. We are now in Gettysburg, the site of the famous Civil War battle. Lydia Leicester, Abraham Cell's great-granddaughter, will be remembered because General Meade used her house as his headquarters during the Battle of Gettysburg. Lydia and her children fled to relatives in Silver Run, Maryland when the fighting began, so General Meade occupied this vacant house. This small kitchen was used by the widow Leicester and her 4 children that were still at home in 1863. There was 1 bedroom downstairs and a loft with beds upstairs. An artillery shell destroyed her bedstead. Here in this little 2-room house, Meade and his generals decided on the night of July 2nd to stay and fight the next day, and the battle was won. General Meade is the man who appears to have the Excedrin headache. About noon on July 3rd, the Confederates began shelling the Union lines nearby. Lydia's steps and the porch pillars were shot away. The house was hit by 8 artillery shells and was extensively damaged. Meade withdrew his headquarters to safety. The little barn was also damaged. Lydia lost 2 tons of hay, and the crops in her field were trampled down. Her rail fences were all destroyed, and 17 dead horses littered her yard and the farm after the battle. After the horses rotted, she sold their bones for $3.75. Lydia complained to her dying day about her losses. Lydia's sister, Catherine Slider, lived on a farm about 1.5 miles away. The Slider farm, just off the Emmitsburg Road, was very near the Confederate lines. In fact, the Confederate artillery was almost in their backyard. The Slider house was used as a Confederate field hospital. Because of all the blood, some of these houses stank for years. Maybe that's why the Sliders had sail in October 1863 and moved to Ohio, never to return. Across the street from the Jenny Wade house was the home of Dr. David Studi. He was a physician in Gettysburg. He was also the brother of Mrs. Leicester. Dr. Studi helped care for the wounded during and after the battle. Dr. Studi's house was right about here. This is the end of the historical part of our video. In a few years, of Union Township will look like this, and many of the landmarks of our history will have disappeared. Let's now join the 50th Cell reunion. There were many special features this year. Hi, my name is Kenneth Cell. Welcome to the 50th Cell reunion. This is a great day for the Cell clan. This is my cousin Herb Cell, my 4th cousin. His dad and my dad convened the first reunion in 1946 right here on this very spot. Dr. Dean Cell of Denver, Colorado purchased these beautiful gold medallions for everyone who attended the 50th reunion, and also these commemorative bookmark ribbons. Dick Cell of Kent, Washington had this eye-catching banner made especially for this year's reunion. Anna May Sell Gobrecht, our secretary, baked this attractive cake especially for the 50th reunion. In 1989, I made this chart of the first 7 generations of the Cell family. Only the first 4 generations are shown here. Each year the chart is updated as members of the 7th generation pass away. Here Fred Kaufman and his sister Elaine Smith, descendants of Jacob Cell III, study the chart. People are always searching it to see just how they are related. People who come for the noon lunch begin gathering a little before noon. It's a great time for cousins who haven't seen each other for a while to catch up on the news.
This is the laying on of the hot dogs by qualified grill master Carroll Hockensmith. So how many years did you go to school for this?
Guaranteed indigestion.
Over here is his trusty assistant who's doing the burgers.
The family of Bertha Cell Rindauer has been stalwart supporters of the Cell reunion for the past 50 years. People are asked to place their name and address in the register so they can receive a notice of next year's reunion. Anna Cell Schlegel, 33rd and 34th president of the reunion, came early, but due to poor health could not stay. She's one of the few remaining 7th generation of Cells. She's 93 years old. Cell t-shirts were a hot selling item. Cell t-shirts were first sold in 1988. Babies came who had never attended a reunion before. These cousins hadn't seen each other in 10 years. There were old cousins who had known each other for many years, and cousins who see each other occasionally, and there were new cousins from different parts of the country meeting for the first time.
Almighty God, the Father and Maker of all things, it was through thy loving and blessed providence that we came into the world and have been preserved and kept unto this time, that we are permitted now, as a united band of parents and children, together with those who came into the family circle through the holy bonds of matrimony, in this pleasant place to enjoy this happy reunion and feast.
Since the second Cell reunion, we have used this prayer written by Reverend James Cell of Altoona. Today, Frederick Cell, a great nephew of the author, reads the prayer.
Word us and help us to so number our days that we may always walk in the ways and wisdom and devote our lives to thy service.
I'm just pleased of the many lines of cells that we have for this wonderful 50th reunion. Herb, where are you?
I'm here. You're usually saying, how are you?
Of being a program chairman, I guess. I missed a few years. But on the program first are two sisters, Lori Redding and Tricia Trajak, who are daughters of, I hope I got that right, who are daughters of Anna May. Anna May was one of the first performers here, and you'll hear from her again. So Tricia and Lori, they have two little songs they'd like to sing for you.
While the adults have the program, small children go out and play on the swings in the picnic woods.
Sisters, sisters, there have never been no sisters. Never had to have a chaperone, no sir. I'm there to keep my eye on her. Caring, sharing, every little thing that we are wearing. When a certain gentleman arrived from Rome, she wore the dress and I stayed home. All kinds of weather, we stick together, the same in the rain and sun. Three different faces put in tight places, we act and we act as one.
These are the three daughters of John Cell, the co-founder. All three are ex-presidents of the reunion.
Hello, Dolly, well, hello. Dolly, it's so nice to have you back where you belong. You're looking swell, Dolly, I can tell. Dolly, you're still growing, you're still growing, you're still going strong.
Since 1978, Anna May, our secretary, has entertained us with her imitation of Louis Armstrong's Hello, Dolly. Medallions were given out first to the people who attended the first reunion in 1946. Since Ada Sell attended 49 of the 50 reunions, she was the first to receive a medallion.
Mrs. Nadine Greenholt is the oldest person who was at the first reunion, the oldest person now who was at the first reunion. She'll be 93 tomorrow.
Hey.
Let's sing happy birthday to her.
Okay.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Nadine. Happy birthday to you.
May you have many more. Niece, is that correct?
Oh, sister.
Sister?
Sister.
Are you sisters? You should have sang sisters.
Thank you very much.
Reunions you attended?
No, I don't.
Well, we didn't count them up, but... Nadine Reindauer.
You know you were here since.
Pearl Reindauer.
Can I get over your hat? Let me give you the ribbon. You're the lucky girl.
And Pearl's over here. You said you got Pearl? Pearl. She is.
Here, let me give you a ribbon.
Do you feel like you have just finished a marathon?
Yeah, thank you. I feel like Miss America.
Well, we're using the old name.
Yeah, I know. Well, my husband's dead since 72.
More sisters.
Yeah. There were 6 of us, and there's only 5.
This lady, she was the youngest child present at the reunion. So here she is, the only person who has the possibility of going to the 100th reunion.
And now you told my age.
Well,
The day over 65.
Oh, thank you.
since the 50th reunion was 49 years ago.
She was 4 months old.
4 months old.
Thank you.
He remembers it well.
Oh, yes.
Cato from Harnsville.
I was wondering if Bob was reading.
His father was the first elected president of the Cell Reunion. Oh, there's Catherine, too. And their son was the youngest boy present.
Let me give you a ribbon.
However, he's in Florida, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. While we're waiting here, Clyde and Catherine have a son, Kenneth. When I called Clyde the other month about his his youngest son's address, I talked to Kenneth and of the program committee for 50 years.
Here, let me give you a blue ribbon.
Isabel Cell. Did you really sing in the first reunion?
That's what they said.
Is that right?
Poor souls, huh? I wonder if we knew our lines then.
I don't know.
We'll practice the next time. Herbie said we could sing in 10 years. So we'll practice.
Here's my help.
Oh. Thank you.
There you go, brother. Thank you.
Mabel Cell. She really isn't able to be with us today, but I'm sure she'd like to. Pearl Cell. She's able. Everybody wants to get into the act.
Well, you were the one that said you wanted a medal.
Ask and you shall receive, right? Well, thank you. We used to fight, now we love each other a little bit more. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
50 years.
Well, then you don't deserve a medal.
Lie a lot, don't you?
I'm a cell.
Take your head off for a moment.
Look at that. I spent 3 years in the Marines in World War II and didn't even get a medal. Ribbon.
Now you got a ribbon for you in effect.
Gene Stair, now Louis.
Change it over the years.
Oh, thank you.
That was a great compliment. My brother said that Gene hasn't changed a bit in the last 50 years.
I think that sounds right.
And now we have the great pleasure to have Glenn and Larry Unger, who are more cells than any of us, since both of their grandparents were cousins, not first cousins or second cousins, but they have descended from 4 different cell lines, so they have more cell genes than anybody else here. Glenn and Larry Unger.
So does that make you a super cell?
Everybody wants to get into the act. He's a super cell.
Maybe I should be a stand-up comedian also.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
These are the past presidents.
They had some lot of past presidents, didn't they?
Anna May Sell Mickley was first president in 1960. Betty Lou Sell.
Go ahead, walk out there. Snap here.
Betty Lou Sell. She was vice president, and the president died, and so she served in his place. Tim Sell. Is Tim here?
Not here.
Okay. Janet Cell Cole, 29th president, 1974. Larry Unger, 30th president, 1975. Anna May Sell Mickley was here for a short time. She was 33rd president.
Let's get everybody.
So we have 10. We have 10 of the 17 living presidents here with us today. I think that's very nice. Would you please give us a hand?
Okay, Secretary Treasurers, yay.
Mary Weaver Althoff was our secretary for 32 years, from 1951 to 1983. Her dedication and enthusiasm were instrumental in keeping the reunion going.
It was given to me. In fact, I thought about this about 6 years ago, and it's taken this long for it to come to fruition. Would you bump your brother and tell him to listen? This This is the Golden Turtle Award. This is awarded to the cell who has traveled the least distance from his roots in 300 years. Now, who would that person be? After a very careful study, I have ascertained that Herbert Cell has traveled the least distance, less than 5 miles in 300 years, not counting his time in the service. And so, on behalf of your sisters, Herb, will you come forward and receive the Golden Turtle Award? And it's quite appropriate on this golden anniversary of the reunion that we have the Golden Turtle Award.
Okay, brother. Can't wait. A gold watch. A turtle.
The Golden Turtle. Golden Turtle. Less than 5 miles in 300 years. Now, there was a really very close second. Bill Cell, you didn't get very far away either, but you missed it by 6/10 of a mile.
One fence row.
One fence row.
Thank you, Ken, for that wonderful research. I guess I won't get much further.
The smaller children played organized games outside in the picnic woods while the adults continued the reunion. The children had a great time. Since 1967, bingo has been an important part of the post-reunion afternoon. Well, the 50th reunion has come to an end. Here is little Jessica Tiblin, the youngest child present at the reunion. Will she attend the 100th reunion? Will there be a 100th reunion? That all depends on you, your children, and your grandchildren.